We begin VSA today with a tribute to one of our guests on the show. He's the chairman of Transworld Security Systems, Dr. Ona Ekomo, who died just yesterday after a brief illness. Dr. Ekomo was one of the leading African voices who gave his time, expertise and resources in trying to find an end to Nigeria's security challenges. Now let's take a listen to his very last appearance here on VSA.
Terrorism is a fight you fight in the offense. You can't play defense. You can't stay and say, let's wait for them to attack and we'll repel. There's nothing to repel. Go after them, fish them out. They are bad guys. And then, make an arrangement for them to meet their makers quickly. But the point here is we need to set up things that will strengthen the citizenry, strengthen the population against incessant attacks, because it's going to take some time to defeat them, obviously, to hunt them out. So we need to have force multiplication. We need force multipliers. We need communication means such that when people are under attack, they can call out their distress out. And we must have rapid means to get to sites where people are in distress, so that we can save our populations while we embark on a deliberate ground offensive, that is not ground, integrated offensive, ground and air offensive, to take out the bad guys.
Late Dr. Ona Ekomo there for you. You know, in a country that seems to be devoid of ideas on ways to protect its citizens, Ona Ekomo's words were a voice of reason, never afraid to say, never shy to speak, and he spoke truth to power and raised his hand and voice where it mattered the most, even though he also suffered in the hands of kidnappers. You know, he lived a good life and one of immense impact. He left an indelible mark on people, his society, and his country. He was an industrious youth, full of ideas, brimming with confidence, one who broke ceilings and did the very impossible. In his older years, he was a man of great wisdom, excellent opinions, impartiality, and a drive for the betterment of Nigeria and the continent. In business, he was a success. In security, he built a bulwark and will be remembered for the greatness he exuded, the truth he spoke, and the excellence he portrayed. As I say, great bodies die, but great minds don't die. Inside the tomb of great men lay dead bodies, but at the library of great men lay the living minds of dead bodies. Wishing the family and Nigeria the fortune to bear the irreparable loss of Ona Ekomo. Welcome, good to have you join us on VSA. I'm Sulaiman Lede, and today we're looking at the big news coming in from Zambia as they go to the poll on Thursday, with President Edward Lungu of the Patriotic Front going head-to-head against perennial opposition Hakainde Hichilema of the United Party for National Development. President Lungu, much touted as a man lucky to be leading the country, is battling his political future and restoration of the trust of the people. It's not just an election in Zambia this time around. It's the citizens' reactions to the issues threatening the nation's future. With the burden of debt pegging Zambia down and the future looking bleak, citizens look to the polls as yet another opportunity to find their country's waning glory amid topical national and global issues. Zambia has borrowed heavily since 2012 and is believed to owe as much as $12 billion to China and in Eurobonds. Soaring unemployment, which hit its 10-year high in 2020, and a constantly depreciating local currency, kwacha, some of the issues Zambians are looking at going into the elections. The clock is ticking, the time is near, and it's the future on ballots in Zambia. Well, joining me on the square today to discuss the current economic situation and the country in general, I have on the show Trevor Hambai, who's a senior partner, Development Finance Associate. It's good to see you again, Trevor. And of course, Isaac Popo, Executive Director, Center for Trade, Policy and Development. Gentlemen, welcome to VSA. Now, let me start with Trevor. We've read and seen a lot about Zambia's debt burdens, and we have actually had a conversation on this before, and the pressure it's putting on the country. So going into Thursday's election, has it become an issue of note in the country for everyone?
Soleimani, good evening. Thank you very much for the question. So the debt situation for the country, yes, as you have rightly mentioned, we have got an external debt of $12.7 billion. And what has happened is that government, in trying to be able to sustain the repayment of the debt position, have been introducing a number of taxes, as well as removing subsidies on a lot of commodities. This has inevitably put pressure on the exchange rate. And because of the fact that the country is import dependent, we find that a lot of commodities have increased in price by more than 100% in the last 2 years. So this is directly speaking to the livelihoods of the people. And I think this is a cardinal issue they'll be asking themselves when they go to the polls as to whether the economic fundamentals are really speaking to their best interest.
Well, let me bring in Isaac here quickly. Isaac, listening to Trevor, one to ask is, we already know that Zambia is arguably Africa's largest producer of copper, and that has formed a good basis for its economic prosperity in previous years. When did things start going down for a country so blessed on the continent?
Thank you so much, and good evening to those that are tuned in. Well, indeed, this country has a number of resources. Actually, beyond copper, this country also has gold. It also has a number of other precious minerals that it extracts. In terms of when the challenges we are facing started, they started over 5 years ago, where we saw a rapid accumulation of public debt under the name of engaging in infrastructure project development. And when a number of civil society actors tried to raise serious concerns with regards to the rapid accumulation of public debt, the assurance was provided by government that it was going to be sustainable. But over the years, we've noted that there were no proper mechanisms that were put in place to ensure that we match the debt that we're accumulating with our capacity to pay back, but not only pay back, matching it with our capacity to mobilize the resources. Other concerns also centered around the strategicness of the projects that were embarked on. A lot of us in the sector felt that the resources that were borrowed were actually not invested in sectors that were going to guarantee returns for us to pay back when the loans fell due. When it comes to copper, if you look at the international prices, copper is actually performing very well. It is at an all-time high compared to the performance in the recent years. But the big question has been the extent to which the local people will get to benefit from the improved prices for the commodity. And that actually gets to speak to the structural and policy challenges that have existed for some time, which have affected or hindered the ability for the country to reap meaningful benefits from the resources it has.
Well, Isaac, let me bring in Trevor quickly here, because I'm happy that you've taken it to the grassroots, which is very key and important here. But again, Trevor, how do we, explain the kind of government President Lungu is running? Does it also, is it safe to say it's a kind of government with policies that trickle, down to the people, especially at the grassroots?
That is an interesting question, but Soleimani, you appreciate that the governance structure that we have in Zambia is reflective of the African continent, that a lot of our political leaders come into office and their basic interest is not for the best interest of the country, but more inclined towards what is in their best interest for them to amass wealth, and secondly, what is in the best interest of their political party, so that the party members can benefit from this. There are a number of things that have happened in the country that do not speak to the grassroots, which is the basic issue about the debt position where we have gone. Is that for a country that is trying to support its majority members, citizens, the debt position is obviously negative to the country, and this is starting to reflect. We've had a very big, massive infrastructure development, but we have not been able to structure the infrastructure development in proportion to having to invest into the productive sector. That the infrastructure development should only take a proportion, maybe 30 or 40% of our investment, and the other one goes into having to increase the livelihoods of the citizens, which would then speak to the grassroots. So unfortunately, the strategy that we have taken as a country does not support the best interest of the grassroots.
Let me stay with you, Trevor, for a bit before I come back to Isaac. And this has to do with Zambia having one of the highest GDP to debt ratios in the world. Was this a product of, corruption or the risk of investing in the future, as we've also witnessed in other African countries, as highlighted by you?
So unfortunately, corruption is a key factor towards having to drive debt contraction. This applies to a lot of African countries. And the key reason that we have around this is that most of these governments find it prudent to be able to borrow towards having to do infrastructure projects, because through these projects, then they are able to tap into the treasury to access the funds that have come in to support this. We have very big issues here around overpricing of infrastructure projects, that a project that would be worth 200 million is priced at 400 million because there are parties there that are benefiting from it. We've also situations where we are undertaking a project that is not technically viable, but it is being done because people can then use this project to be able to access the funds. We've also situations where the projects are being undertaken, the contracts under the project are being given to affiliates who are benefiting from this. So this is one of the key factors that has driven the point of debt contraction, that we're contracting debt when we don't need it because there's personal gain. We are also contracting debt to be able to implement projects that are overpriced because there's personal gain. And this is a very big contributor towards us continuing to accrue debt even when we are not able to repay that debt.
I think I should bring in Isaac here. And Isaac, this has to do with some of the key things that some Africans are asking, for clarity. China, we already know, is Zambia's single highest creditor. And what many Africans read is that some major Zambian corporations are being taken up by China in the face of growing debts. Help us and make this more clear. How true is this information?
Well, in terms of China, in terms of Zambia owing China.
Well, there seems to be a glitch in that connection to you, Isaac. Perhaps I should just quickly go back to Trevor. And I'm quite sure, Trevor, you got the question I just asked Isaac, and it has to do with clarity. Some people in other African countries, especially in Nigeria, and the gist is that some of the corporations in Zambia are now being taken over by the Chinese, who is, the Chinese who are the biggest creditors of your country. Is that the situation in Zambia at the moment?
Soleimani, I can't categorically state that they have taken over, but we do have instances which are very unclear in terms of what affiliation we have with the Chinese. The first aspect that you must appreciate is that there's been very poor transparency regarding the type of debt we have acquired from China. Whether this debt is concessional or it's commercial, and what terms we have around this. Is this a medium-term loan? Is this a long-term loan? And as well as the fact that we do not know what interest we are paying on this. But the key aspect is that all the Chinese debt that the country has contracted is all associated with specific infrastructure for which, if we are unable to pay, there is a possibility that we could lose that infrastructure. The one that we have is our national television, which is the Zambian National Broadcasting Corporation, was undergoing major transition from analog to digital, and this was supported by a $293 million loan from China. But what we do see, so they have basically, what you do see now is that you've got Chinese that are actually running aspects of that institution. They have got offices in there, they're building new offices around there that are all Chinese. We have got where they have actually put signage outside the building, which is in Chinese, that I, as a Zambian, cannot read. So I think we do actually run the risk of having to lose specific infrastructure that they have supported in financing. But technically right now, we do not have the empirical evidence or the transparency around the contracts we have signed to understand where that position is.
You know, a lot of Zambians will be worried because you, as an expert, and some other experts in Nigeria and other African countries are worried. And keep in mind, it was only recently in Nigeria that the Chinese also financed the rail project in the country. And a lot of people have been asking for clarity of the minister in charge of transportation. Now, what's the feeling of the average Zambian who's trying to understand what this means? If someone like Trevor who find the Mandarin so strange, like myself, let alone the average Zambian. So how worried are they, especially now that we're looking to go into the polls just on Thursday this week?
So the general feeling out there, I think the people of the country have a feeling that we as a country have sold the country to the Chinese because of how far they're invested. In terms of, firstly, in terms of the infrastructure, is that they have also financed one of the biggest hydropower stations that was just commissioned 2 weeks ago for $2.3 billion. They have financed our national airports, 2 international airports, that the main one in the capital city and one in the mining region of the Copper Belt was also financed by the Chinese. They've also financed a number of health institutions, which are hospitals, as well as infrastructure, which is the road network, all have been financed by the Chinese. But they've also invested in a number of areas as private investment, but under the Chinese umbrella, that they have invested in mining. They now own a mine in the Copper Belt. They've also invested in agriculture. They've also infiltrated in having to set up retail and wholesale outlets that are Chinese. So in essence, they are in every part of the economy, and they probably have better benefits because they are offered investment incentives that are better than what the Zambians are getting. And the general feeling out there is that we have lost our country and we have sold our country for a penny to the Chinese.
Well, Trevor, isn't there a law in place whereby key national, assets that also borders around national security are exempted from such, a deal with another country? For instance, you made mention of the airports. You also made mention of some other key, national projects. Is there a law in place in Zambia that should have protected some of these key assets for the country and the people?
I'm not sure that there is a specific law that I can cite that speaks to having to protect these sites. But technically speaking, I think under the Security Act, which is the security of the nation, there are specific strategic installations and assets that speak to sovereign power that must not be given to a foreign entity, which is the same like a communication center or a national media center cannot be put into foreign hands. In the same way, you cannot put a hydropower station into foreign hands, because then these speak to the very nitty-gritty details of what is sovereign security. So I cannot understand why we have foreigners actually having to run these things, because yes, as you have mentioned, they speak to national security. But it is a question where we ask ourselves, is there anything that is safe within our country in exchange for currency? And that is the position where we are willing to sell our country into debt because an individual is going to benefit. Then you figure there is no recourse where somebody has the conscience to uphold the security of the country because they'll get the payment.
Now let's talk about a little bit of politics. I know you're an expert, but again, we're just trying to get a sense of what this will mean as the country goes, into that election. Hichilema has contested in 5 elections, and in all 5, he's lost. That's probably a statement of Zambia's lack of belief in his political credentials. What may have changed in the last 5 years that puts him in a strong position now?
The first aspect, I think, that is speaking to the benefit of the opposition leader, Hakainde Hichilema, is where the country is economically. One of the key aspects of anybody going to the polling station to cast their vote is going to be determined by the economic status in which they are in. And in the last 5 years, we have seen a continued depreciation of the growth of the economy. We've seen a continued increase in the cost of living, and we've seen a continued increase in factors that are speaking to human rights, where these human rights have been abused, where freedom of expression is limited, as well as freedom of assembly is also limited. We have seen that going into the campaign, we have got a situation where the opposition is not being allowed to freely go out and campaign. So all these factors, I think, are speaking negatively to the current ruling party. And this is giving advantage to the opposition. But you must also remember the last 2 elections that we had an election in 2015 following the death of our then president, Michael Sata. And at that time, the opposition, who is Hakainde Hichilema, as well as another election in 2016, in both those elections, the difference between the winning candidate and the losing candidate was just barely over 100,000 votes from the registered 6 million voters. So that margin was really, really very small. And you'd think that in the time that we have come through in the last 5 years, and considering the difficulties that the Zambians have gone, they'll be more inclined to think that they want to try another leader to take them through these challenges.
Let me bring in Isaac. Isaac, apologies, good to know you're back. Isaac, very quickly here, because we're already getting into the thick of things concerning the election. But again, as an expert in charge, on trade matters, you reminded us that it goes beyond copper, and you reeled out a whole lot, which means a big blessing for the country. How would you rate President Lungu's handling or harnessing of these, potential of a country so blessed as Zambia in the last years?
Well, in terms of the last 5 years, I think we have missed a good opportunity to manage our affairs in such a way that we should have positioned ourselves as a net exporter. If you look at our country, it is a country that is surrounded by a number of countries that give us an opportunity for us to export various commodities, even outside the mining sector. So there are countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo that provide a big market for Zambian produce. But if you look at the trade statistics, even outside the COVID-19 situation, Zambia has struggled to take advantage of some of those opportunities. And the big challenge really that has been dominating conversations with regards to how the economy has been managed is what Mr. Hambai had brought out. Issues related to public debt, the rate at which we're accumulating public debt. I hope you can even get me. The campaigns underway here and the number of vehicles that are passing through the hotel where I am lodging. So what I was just trying to say, what has dominated the bigger conversations with regards to the economy has been issues around public finance management, the rate at which we've been accumulating public debt, and how we've been using those resources in terms of deploying them to key sectors that can deliver on development. On that score, we have not done very well as a country. It can also be seen from our failure to meet some of the interest obligations that had fallen due on some of the debt that we have. Even as we speak now, come 2022, there are bullet payments that we need to make on some of the Eurobonds that we have acquired. And if we get to 2022 without securing the restructuring deal with most of the lenders to the country, that will put us under pressure again. And we might also see that impact trickling down to even the performance of the local currency.
I'll stay back with you, Isaac. And but just to answer you, we can hear you clearly, and there's no intrusion of the campaign, noise outside the hotel where you lodged. But quickly here, what are the issues? Now we're talking about campaigns, the last minute, rush to win more people to come on their side. So what are the issues? What are the key issues? Because in many African countries, campaigns are just almost like a carnival where little is said about what these leaders will ultimately be offering the people. Is that the same thing happening in Zambia at the moment?
So in the case of Zambia, one of the big issues that I've observed even here on the Copper Belt, which is the mining province of our country, one of the key issues that people have been raising and they are looking forward to are plans on how those that are proposing to govern this country when it comes to addressing the high cost of living. The cost of living has been rising rapidly in the recent past, which has been making it quite difficult for a lot of citizens to cope. But added to that, a number of citizens have actually lost jobs due to the pandemic that we had, which saw a number of businesses closing down. And even some of the mining companies, we saw them threatening to go on care and maintenance, which was a serious threat when it came to employment creation, or even just retention of those that were already employed. So one of the big issues that people are raising in this campaign has been on how the existing or the current government or those that are in the opposition plan to address the high cost of living. But besides that, there's also a bit of a challenge in terms of the way the campaigns are going. One of our observations from the Center for Trade Policy and Development is that they are devoid of discussing key issues that are affecting people. We are seeing more of character assassination instead of the political parties focusing on key issues that can help to improve the quality of life for the local people.
We'll take a moment. When we come back, we'll be looking to asking more questions. And again, I'll also love to see Trevor weigh in, especially on campaign issues in Zambia as it relates to other African countries. That's when we return. Stay with us. More than 6 million Zambians have been registered to vote as they decide on the president to change their fate for good and turn around their sharply dwindling fortunes. Out of poverty and hunger, Zambians have been forced to move to South Africa in search of pastures greener than what their country has to offer. Zambia's dwindling revenues are also an issue, as nearly half goes to debt servicing and paying off of its heavy loans. 40% of its total revenue goes into the payment of civil servants' wages. It's an election in a pandemic, and it holds the threats of elections of its nature. I still have Trevor, who is a senior partner, Development Finance Associates in Zambia, and Isaac, who is the executive director of Center for Trade Policy and Development. Gentlemen, it's our closing moment as we take this home. Let me start with Trevor. I did say I was going to come back and ask you about campaign issues. Listening to Isaac, I decided to ask Isaac because I have been speaking with a lot of people from different African countries, and the key issues they've been concerned about is that the main issues are not being talked about when we talk about campaigns, and that is why some African leaders also somehow deliberately evade debate. What's the feel? What's the vibe in Zambia? Is it any different from what many other African countries have experienced?
Suleimani, I think you're absolutely right. That trend is also true for Zambia, that a lot of election campaign is not based on issues that they need to discuss. It is more based on issues where it's finger pointing and character assassination. The other aspect around this is obviously because of the poverty level on the African continent, the electorates are very easy to manipulate. That usually when they go to campaigns, they're distributing basic food items, they're distributing clothing, which then gives the electorate the feeling that they're dealing with the right people who can give them these things, which are basic inducements. And under the electoral regulation, it is not actually allowed, but we see this continuing every election. And this is one of the key aspects that I think there's a general trend out there, which is speaking to the fact that African leaders do not want to see the development of the nations, because then you will have an educated electorate who are independent and cannot be swayed by basic principles unless you're going to be talking about economic issues that are fundamental to the growth of the nation. And it will make your campaign a lot harder, because then you are speaking to people that have got knowledge at their fingertips, and you cannot buy it with simple inducement.
You know, Trevor, the thing now is that the currency is depreciating, and of course, unemployment is on the rise. Is it safe to say these two are tied to the loans that the country is servicing with its creditors?
Absolutely. The performance of the economy, not just the depreciation of the kwacha, but the performance of the economy has been directly associated with the debt position. What really it means is that we have been unable to be able to put revenue back into the economy as part of the investment. And government, in trying to service this debt, has also gone into domestic debt to accrue domestic debt, which they can utilize to pay for the international debt. And this is then taking away the basic resources that should have been available to the private sector to invest into the economy. And then this means that the economy is not growing. But also due to the fact that we are having to find so much hard currency to meet the debt repayment, it's put pressure on our exchange rate, which has then meant that the currency is depreciating. Our currency has depreciated by more than 200% in the last 4 years because of the debt position. And this is an issue that is speaking to what the electorate is actually feeling, because it's also coming to reflect towards the cost of living, that with the depreciation of the kwacha, the price of goods and services continues to go up because they are dollar related and because we import 70% of the goods that we use here. And this is now speaking to the very high cost of living.
Is there anything, that could just make Lungu a favorite or otherwise going into this election? Has he done anything, of note since his emergence?
Technically speaking, there's very little that we can speak that is positive. Yes, we have had a lot of infrastructure development, but you can see that the infrastructure development is being cardinal, is being key to getting the country in so much debt, which has been negative to the general populace in the country. So from an economic perspective, from a political perspective, there's very little that we can speak that is speaking positively to the current leader, who is Edgar Lungu. But there are obviously different circles that believe otherwise, especially the ones that are affiliated to the political party that he stands for, which is the PF, the Patriotic Front. And these have had general benefits throughout the 5-year of his term, and they will be willing to speak to positive that, yes, there have been benefits that we have gotten. But if you're looking to the general populace of the 16 million Zambians, the answer will be absolutely, it has been a very, very difficult time, and nothing seems to be speaking positively to the current ruling party.
Well, Isaac, just as it happened in Nigeria and some few other African countries, it's happening in Zambia. Some say deja vu. We've seen it and heard it before. The United States has threatened to restrict the visa of politicians who engage in electoral malpractice, and also threatened to suspend aids to Zambia. What message does this pass to the Lungu government in terms especially of foreign support? I think you have to unmute yourself, Isaac. Oh, great.
Sorry about that. So I think there is a strong message that is being put across by our cooperating partner, the United States. And it's not only the United States, the British government is on record as well, raising concerns with the violation of the rights for some of the political parties. Largely, we've seen that some of the political parties, especially the main opposition political party, has had serious challenges to campaign in some of the strategic provinces of the country, among which includes the Copper Belt, where there's a lot of mining. So the opposition political parties has been blocked on several occasions, of course, using the Zambia police, who have been indicating that they have received instructions not to actually allow the opposition leader to enter some of the provinces due to what they're terming as security reasons associated to probably the presence of the head of state in the province at the same time. But on the other hand, it is actually a dent on our democracy, and there is actually need for us to recommit ourselves to what we had set up for ourselves when we embraced to go the route of being a democratic country. And the expectation is that a level playing field needs to be created for all those that are competing for public office, and that ultimately should give the voter an opportunity to choose those that they think are best suited to govern and lead the country forward. But in the absence of a fair playing field, these are some of the concerns that eventually lead to petitions, which eventually threaten the peace that we have enjoyed for over 50 years as a country.
You know, Isaac, listening to you, what comes to mind now is the comment or the message from the international communities, or what you call friends of Zambia, the US, the UK. Doesn't such message, speak to just one thing, a deficit of infrastructural development? Looks like an indictment on leadership over the years that have impoverished the people to the extent that someone somewhere else is saying, hey, wait a minute, I wouldn't let you come to my country if you don't do what's right. So how has the infrastructural development initiatives by President Lungu helped Zambia, if there are any?
Well, there are some infrastructure projects that you would deem to be progressive. For instance, when you go to the central part of our country, there is a huge dam that has been constructed that is focusing on promoting irrigation. And to a larger extent, if we're investing our resources into such kind of infrastructure projects that create multiple benefits, I do not think that the citizens would have been very frustrated like the way they are now. I think they are very frustrated because we have invested our resources into ventures that do not actually give direct benefits to the citizens. For instance, there were fire trucks that were bought at overpriced prices, and most of them have actually been struggling to function properly. And citizens raised a lot of concerns in terms of the price at which these were procured. But not only that, more recently, there was a scandal at the Ministry of Health where they had procured drugs which were expired. And now that is a serious threat on the health of the citizens. But besides that, if you look at some of these projects that we have been embarking on, they have been taking a huge chunk of our national budget to a larger extent that they've been affecting our ability to mobilize resources that can go towards health. And we are faced with this pandemic. What does it do? It now leaves us at the mercy of our cooperating partners to make donations for COVID-19 vaccines. But had it been that we had enough resources besides what is being donated, I think as a country would have been talking about having resources that are available to procure the vaccine so that a huge part of our population can be vaccinated and we can get back to normal.
Let me quickly bring in Trevor here, and because I want to bring the aspect of the IMF, Trevor, and it's something quite interesting, looking at Zambian bonds that have increased by 30% since December as investors wait for the IMF support. This is very key here. Lungu has proven not to be a very big fan of the IMF. Do you think Hichilema stands a better chance?
I would think that he stands a better chance. The key aspects around having to be able to get an IMF engagement for the country are dependent on three very basic principles that the IMF has requested. And the first one is speaking to transparency of our debt, that can we be transparent regarding how much debt we have contracted from the Chinese and what type of debt it is, which is the first one. And the second one is speaking to fiscal management, that we need to be able to reduce the debt contraction that we have been contracting since 2015 to sustainable levels. And this will include us having to have a cash budget, that we're only spending that which we have, but also it will also underline in terms of defining where the resources are going to come from to be able to meet our debt repayment. And the third one is obviously governance, where we need to eliminate the issues around corruption, overpricing of infrastructure projects, as well as abuse of office. And those three things basically would then put us in a position where we can negotiate with the IMF to support us. But for where the country is, irrespective of which political party takes the day after the elections, is that we as a country do not have a choice but to be able to negotiate with the IMF for us to be able to get past the position where we have gotten around debt restructuring, because that is the only hope that we can have in terms of having to get international engagements with our bondholders. Our bondholders will not discuss any restructuring of our debt without the IMF support.
Well, you know, I make bold to say this just might be your first election in a pandemic. So, what are the likely things you expect on election day? Because off the top of my head, I sense that this is the first time Zambians, just like many people in the world, will be going into an election whereby physical contact is restricted greatly. Some people, you know, will be scared to even come out to cast their ballot. Do you think that, well, this will cause, a thinning out of, you know, voters on the day?
I'm quite hopeful that most Zambians are genuinely wanting to go out there and cast their vote to be able to determine what happens to the country going forward. Yes, there are COVID restrictions that we do have, but I think in consideration, you will still find that the voters will come out. There's been obviously issues around how safe it's going to be, especially around intimidation, that is a voter not going to be intimidated before they get to a polling station to cast their vote. And I think that is the only single factor that is going to be considered for the Zambians to come out. In the recent week, we have had the National Army has been deployed out into the country, and this has been on the disguise that they are out to ensure that there is peace in the country. And this is a position that we all must embrace, to figure that they're actually out there to protect the electorate rather than offer intimidation for the ruling party to have an advantage.
Let me bring in Isaac quickly here, now as we rounding off. What would be the best result for Zambians, you know, after these polls?
Well, from our end, what we think would be the best result is having the best candidates, or the best party that has the vision that reflects the aspirations of the Zambian people carry the day. Ultimately, we are all citizens, part of the process, and we are all going to contribute in terms of voting. And our appeal to all the electorates that are going to participate in the elections just 2 days to go is that based on the information that has been provided by civil society organizations, platforms such as this one we are on, as well as what they have researched on themselves, they should make choices that reflect their aspirations and they should think through, because 5 years is too long a period for them to live in regret in an event that they make a bad choice.
Are you as hopeful as Trevor that a lot of people will come out irrespective of COVID-19?
It is our expectation that a number of people will actually turn out. We are seeing a lot of eagerness on the part of citizens, especially if you read through social media platforms, if you go through the streets. Commonly you find people expressing a lot of interest to see to it that the day should finally arrive so that they can go and speak their mind through the ballot.
And Trevor, quickly, one last one here for you before we leave. And this speaks to other African leaders, because I know you've done quite an extensive work looking at developments in other African countries. You know, what would be that message from you, Trevor, as an expert, to African leaders in terms of what they do for their people, how they manage their country's economy, vis-a-vis, you know, seeking help from the outside, talking about help from outside the continent?
Suleimani, the first aspect is our capacity for self-governance. I think this is key, that as Africans, we need to be able to determine the self-governance in terms of the direction that our country is going to go. Because once we have determined this, it gives us very clear grounds to be able to determine how we engage foreign governments. But it is important that all the decisions that we take as leaders for our countries firstly speak to the best interest of our nations. What do I need to do that is going to bring value to the country before we look at the personal values that they are looking for in terms of gains? And the second one is speaking to us having a continued strategy in terms of how we want to develop our nations. What I normally see is a very sad situation where every subsequent government that comes wants to wipe out the slate of the previous government and start afresh, which is not speaking to sustainable development. We need to have a long-term strategy that every government that comes is supposed to implement it to ensure that there is continued growth of a specific strategy, and that we have got a timeline when we want to achieve this. But also the will of the people must be fulfilled. We have a lot of issues where we come around in terms of elections being disputed on the African continent, where a particular leader wants to stay over the term of over the life of the term of his office, and this must come to an end on the African continent, because yes, we now have the kind of leaders that can come up who have come from the young generation to lead these countries. And this is very, very important, that we appreciate that leadership is not guaranteed for life,
Exactly.
but one which you actually serve.
Well, I think it's a fine place for us to say thanks for being such nice company, Trevor Hambaye and Isaac Waipopo. Many thanks. Zambia is one of the most blessed countries listening to you, both of you, especially in Southern Africa, and its future promises a lot, but there will be no greater time in history than now for the greatness of the country and for its betterment. I'm Sulaiman. I'll be here again tomorrow.